You know, since my first album back in 1971, I mean, I primarily did music as a hobby. I taught myself songs I learned off the radio.
She's the queen of slide guitar, the red-headed powerhouse with a velvet voice and a razor tongue when she needs it. Bonnie Raitt has spent decades earning respect in a male-dominated world, not with drama, but with dignity. But today, she shocked everyone. For the first time in her career, Bonnie didn't hold back. She named names. 6 musicians she's avoided, clashed with, or quietly loathed. Not because of petty rivalry, because of betrayal, arrogance, and everything that made her fight twice as hard to be heard. This list isn't about gossip. It's about truth, the kind Bonnie Raitt sings in every aching lyric. And each of these names carries a story she never wanted to tell, until now. It starts with a name that still makes her flinch when it shows up in old playlists. The first on her list, the one that still makes her flinch when his name pops up in old playlists, is Eric Clapton. Once seen as a peer, maybe even a kindred spirit in blues, Clapton quickly became the first great disappointment. In the 70s, Bonnie admired his playing, his phrasing, his raw edge. He was fire on a fretboard, untamed and brilliant. But behind the licks and legend there was something else, something colder. Behind closed doors, he didn't just ignore her, he diminished her. He made sure she knew where he thought she belonged, second tier, background noise. A woman with a guitar, not a guitar god. He talked over her in interviews, hijacked conversations on stage, dismissed her input like it was a distraction. There was a moment, a casual cruelty, that never left her. He told a mutual friend she was too polite to be real blues. It wasn't just insulting, it was erasing. As if pain needed to scream to be real. As if heartbreak had to come from a man to matter. It didn't end with words. Clapton's attitude left a stain on every room they shared. Bonnie would enter with her signature grace and leave with her dignity intact but bruised. And slowly, she stopped showing up altogether. Not out of fear, out of choice. They haven't spoken in over 20 years. And if Bonnie has her way, they never will again. Because some walls aren't worth climbing, and some legends are better left unplayed. But Clapton wasn't the only one who underestimated her. Another name came with even more bitterness, because they started as collaborators. The next musician she couldn't keep off the list, especially after a failed attempt at camaraderie, is John Mayer. When Mayer entered the blues scene, Bonnie was intrigued. He had talent, no doubt, that sharp, polished style, the kind of phrasing that made people sit up. She saw potential, maybe even a torchbearer for the genre.
It's to get ourselves, keep ourselves interested and keep growing. And, you know, when you come up with when you have a song that you, like that Los Lobos song, Shake and Shakes.
So she extended a hand. She offered mentorship. What she got instead was a lesson in ego. Mayer turned out to be arrogant, dismissive. He acted like the stage was his kingdom and everyone else merely guests. He seemed more concerned with being worshipped than being authentic. Bonnie saw it up close when she invited him to join her on stage during a festival set. What was meant to be a shared moment became a hijacking. He took the spotlight, soloed endlessly, ignored her signals to wrap it up, and when the crowd clapped for the band's cohesion, he vanished without a word. No thanks, no acknowledgement. The next morning, he told Rolling Stone the set dragged. That wasn't just disrespect, it was betrayal. She had opened a door, and he slammed it behind him. That was the last invitation he ever got. For Bonnie, it wasn't just about professionalism, it was about grace. The grace of knowing when to lead and when to listen. And Mayer, he never listened. From that moment the disappointment hardened into distance, the kind that never mends. Then there's one she used to admire from afar, only to be disillusioned in person, Don Henley. Sharp suits, sharper words. Henley walked like he owned every venue and talked like he owned the people in it. Bonnie had respected his work with the Eagles. How could she not? The harmonies, the lyrics, the cool detachment. But offstage, that detachment turned into something colder, They shared a few benefit gigs in the late 80s. Bonnie came ready to collaborate. Henley came ready to command. He cut her off mid-sentence during rehearsals, dismissed her musical ideas with a smirk, and once leaned in with a half-smile and said, "You should smile more on stage. It softens you." Bonnie froze. Not because she was shocked. She'd heard things like that before. But because it came from someone she'd once considered a peer. And she knew with absolute certainty that he would never have said that to Springsteen, or Petty, or Clapton. It wasn't just the words. It was the way he looked past her, like she didn't matter. The way his compliments came wrapped in condescension. It was subtle, but it stung deeper than a shout. That kind of dismissal isn't loud, but it echoes. She left that tour feeling bruised in places no one could see, and she carried that memory like a splinter, not fatal, but impossible to forget. After Henley, the next name hurt in a different way, because he wasn't just rude, he used her. The next one brought a different kind of wound, one of betrayal and manipulation. That was Ted Nugent. Their paths crossed during a charity tour in the early 90s. Bonnie had been promised a neutral, cause-focused event, an evening of music that transcended politics. She signed on with hope, with heart. But what she stepped into was a circus. Nugent had hijacked the platform, turning every moment on stage into a rant. Guns, government, personal crusades. It wasn't music. It was noise weaponized, and Bonnie, standing backstage, felt her values twisted into a billboard for something she didn't believe in. She felt blindsided, betrayed, trapped in someone else's propaganda. After 2 shows, she pulled out, quietly, decisively. But Nugent didn't let it end there. He mocked her in interviews, called her too sensitive, accused her of not being tough enough to handle real America. It wasn't just disrespect. It was erasure. He painted her as weak for choosing conscience over convenience. But Bonnie didn't break. She never looked back. Because for her, the guitar has always been a shield as much as an instrument. And no platform, no stage was worth standing on if it meant standing beside a voice that tried to drown hers out. Next came someone who operated in silence. A quiet underminer whose coldness stayed with her. That man was Van Morrison. Bonnie loved his early records. She once said his voice felt like dusk, warm, golden, a little haunted. She used to play his albums in hotel rooms on lonely nights, letting his melodies fill the space like incense. But the man behind the music? A different story entirely. They were booked together for a joint show in London. Bonnie came in with respect and high hopes, but Morrison never offered a word, not a greeting, not a glance. He refused to share a sound check, sent curt messages through staff, and walked past her as if she were invisible. Then, as if to drive the knife deeper, he told her manager she was fine for the opening act. As if all her years, her acclaim, her mastery meant nothing. Bonnie didn't raise her voice. She didn't retaliate in words. Instead, she walked on stage that night and delivered a performance that shook the walls. Her guitar roared, her voice soared, and the crowd, hungry for something real, gave her the standing ovation he never expected. Later, she watched from the side as Morrison played. His set was tight, professional, but the electricity was gone. The audience had already chosen. That night, Bonnie learned something. Cruelty doesn't need to be loud to wound. Sometimes the quietest rejection can echo the longest. The final name, the one that left a bitter aftertaste she never quite shook, was Kid Rock. It was never about talent. It was about values. It was about how a stage can be shared, but never respected. When they appeared on the same bill at a summer festival in 2005, Bonnie knew what she was walking into. And still, it managed to rattle her. Before the show even started, she requested a separate dressing area, not because of ego, because of dignity. Because she had already seen the kind of energy he brought backstage. The crude jokes, the way he barked orders at the crew like they were beneath him. The arrogance soaked in cheap beer and entitlement. The way he looked at women like they were props. He strutted around with the loud confidence of someone who thought fame gave him permission to be cruel. Then, after hearing her perform, after witnessing her deliver a soul-bearing, crowd-silencing set, he leaned over to a promoter and sneered, "Is she always that serious?" She didn't flinch. She didn't waste breath replying. She packed her gear, walked out, and has never performed on the same lineup as him since. To this day, she calls that show the most disheartening moment of her touring life, because it wasn't just about one man. It was about everything he represented. A world where loudness drowns out grace, where bravado tramples on respect. And Bonnie, for all her strength, knew that if she stayed silent about it, she'd be letting that world win. Bonnie Raitt has always played clean, but she remembers the dirt. These aren't just feuds. They're battle scars. Each name is tied to a moment where her voice was silenced, her worth questioned, her artistry dismissed. These are the hidden bruises behind the standing ovations. Even with Grammys in her hands and critical acclaim echoing through the years, she was still asked to smile more, talk less, stay in her lane. But Bonnie never played by those rules. She carved her own road, guitar in one hand, grit in the other. She's done being quiet, she's done smiling on command, and she's done pretending that being respected means staying silent about the ones who made the journey harder. Today, she didn't just speak, she named, with clarity, with fire. Not to stir gossip, but to stake her truth in the open. Because for Bonnie, truth has always been louder than any spotlight. And in a world where applause is often cheaper than integrity, she chose the one thing that's never failed her: honesty. She said their names, not for revenge, but for reckoning. Because silence, for her, was never an option. Not on stage, not in life. And in Bonnie Raitt's world, truth still matters more than applause.